7 plus x equals 7. What are we going to do to get x on a side by itself? Add 7. A positive x is being left behind, so 7 plus 7 is 14. What property is that? Good. Addition property of equality. And I'm okay if you abbreviate things, but you do have to have the full name. Okay? Number 4. Right. Opposite of dividing by 4 is to multiply by 4. X is going to equal 32. What property was that? Multiplication property of equality. And number 5? Divide both sides by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3 equals x. What property? Division property of? Good. Questions on those? Let's do a little bit of fast forwarding here. Okay, into your foldable. Two-step equations. When you are trying to get a variable on a side by itself, you're actually doing the order of operations backwards. Okay, so normally in the order of operations, we would do parentheses, exponents, multiplier, divide, and then add and subtract last, right? Well, if I'm going to undo an equation, I'm rewinding it, so I'm going to do the add or subtract first. So I'm going to get rid of addition and subtraction questions. If you recall last year when I gave this to you, I explained this as an equation that this is you and a boyfriend or girlfriend on a date, correct? And who is the number being added or subtracted? Little brother or little sister. Well, if you're going into the movie theater, who do you want to get rid of first? Hopefully the sibling, because otherwise why are you on the date in the first place? So hopefully you want to get rid of the little brother or sister. So what is the opposite of subtracting 2? Adding 2. So we are going to have 3x equals 6 when we do that. So once you undo addition or subtraction, it should just leave you one step then, right? So what are you going to do to get x on a side by itself now? Divide by 3. X is going to equal 2. So along the way, back here, when we added 2 to each side, what property did you use? You used the addition property of equality. And here, when you divided both sides, you used the division property of equality. How do I know that x equals 2 is the correct answer? Plug it back in. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 minus 2 is 4. Okay, in a question like x over 9 minus 15 equals 12, what's the first thing we're going to do? I'm sorry? Add 15 to each side. So x over 9 is going to equal 12 plus 15 is? Next. Now what? Multiply both sides by 9. X will equal? What? 243. Now I should be able to take 243 divided by 9. That should get me back, add your, or subtract your 15 to check and see if you have 12. Again, you should have done 2 properties of equality here. Addition property of equality and the multiplication property of equality. Down below, 10 equals m over 4 plus 2. What's the first thing we are going to do to get m on a side by itself? Subtract 2. 10 minus 2. And what are we going to do now to get m on a side by itself? Multiply both sides by 4. 8 times 4 is 32. Question number 2. What are we going to do to get a on a side by itself? I'm sorry? Add 5. We have a negative a that is being left behind. What is a negative 8 plus 5? Negative 3. Now, how are we going to get a on a side by itself? Multiply by negative 1. What property is this when we multiply by a negative 1? What property is that? It's super fancy. Go find it. Not the identity property. Identity property we multiplying times a positive number. Not the inverse property. Inverse property of addition says that if I multiply a number times its reciprocal, I get 1. No. You just multiplied everything times what? 1. What kind of a 1? The property is called the multiplication property of negative 1. That's how fancy it is. You multiply by a negative 1, it's called the multiplication property of negative 1. Meaning, if you multiply everything times negative 1, it turns it to its opposite sign. So this is known as the multiplication property of negative 1. You might want that information for future reference. Like today's worksheet, for example. Number 3. First thing we're going to do in number 3. So x over 12 is going to equal 1 minus 5 is? Next. Multiply everything by positive 12. X is going to equal? What two properties did we use there? First one? Subtraction property of equality. Second one? Multiplication property of equality. And number 4, first thing we're going to do here? Subtract 8. You're leaving behind a negative 3y. Do not forget that subtraction sign is part of your negative. What is 14 minus 8? Next. Divide by negative 3. Y is going to equal negative 2. Okay, back to the white page in your notes. You'll cut out. Go ahead and solve those questions in that line. So the first one, 3x plus 7 equals 1. What's the first thing you're going to do?
Subtract 7.
3x is going to equal.
Negative 6.
Next,
Divide 3.
x will equal.
Negative 3.
4x plus 1 equals 13. What's the first thing we're going to do there?
Subtract 1.
Subtract 1. 4x is going to equal. 13 minus 1 is
12.
12. Undo multiplication. Opposite of multiplication is
Division.
division. So divide both sides by 4. X is going to equal 3. Next, what are we going to do to get y on a side by itself?
Subtract 5.
Right, we're still undoing all addition and subtraction first. So what's 13 minus 5? 8 equals your y over your 3. How are you going to get y on a side by itself now?
Minus 3.
Multiply both sides by 3. What is 8 times 3?
24.
So y should equal 24. How about in this one?
Subtract 8.
Subtract 8. What is 21 minus 8?
13.
And 13 equals what kind of a p?
Negative.
Okay, so how are you going to get it to a positive p?
Times negative 1.
What property is that when you multiply times a negative 1?
And positive negative 1.
Multiplication property of negative 1, correct. In this one,
Plus 9.
so what is a negative 51 plus 9 positives? Negative 40 what? 2 equals negative 3x. So negative divided by negative is a positive. Dividing both sides by negative 3. 42 divided by 3 is 14. So that one's easy to get tricked on, especially if you called this 59 and didn't pay attention to a negative being added to a positive there. So any questions on solving two-step equations? Okay, let's transition into story problems. You order iris bulbs from a catalog. Iris bulbs cost 90 cents each. What does that already sound like? 90 cents each. Sounds like multiplication, doesn't it? The shipping charge is $2.50. If you have $18.50 to spend, how many iris bulbs can you order? What's our variable? What are we trying to solve for? Okay, so B is going to be the number of iris bulbs. In our first sentence, iris bulbs cost 90 cents each. What do we got going on there? 90 cents each.
Multiplication.
Okay, what is it going to look like?
0.9 times
0.9 times B, 90 cents per bulb. Shipping charge is $2.50
plus 2
plus $2.50. Then what?
equals 18.50.
Yep, your total bill came to $18.50. So right there's 2 points for story problems. 1 point for identifying your variable, 1 point for your equation. Point number 3 now is to solve. So what's the first thing we're going to do?
Subtract 250.
Yep, subtract the shipping charge off. So $18.50 minus $2.50 is, so that means you had $16 to spend on bulbs, correct? Now what?
Divide.
So you're dividing by 9/10. B is going to equal 17 7/9. It actually comes out to be 17.7 repeating. Can you really purchase 7/9 of an iris bulb? So the question says, how many iris bulbs can you order?
17.
You're only going to be able to order 17 iris bulbs. This one. We are supposed to justify our steps as we solve it. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more room. First thing we're going to do, subtract 4. And if we subtract 4 off of each side, what property is that?
Subtraction property would equal.
Eight minus 4 is 4 equals now what? Now, in your homework, they might not multiply both sides times the negative 24. Because we're controlling the steps, I will let you multiply both sides times negative 24. They might break this into 2 steps. They might say multiply by 24 for the multiplication property of equality, and then multiply by negative 1 for the multiplication property of negative 1. Does that make sense? So they might break it apart in 2, but because we're controlling it, I will let you do it this way. So what property are we doing right now?
Multiplication property of equality.
Correct. So my negative 24s are going to cancel. Negative 24 times 4 would be a negative,
96.
and we're done. Same thing. 3 minus 5z equals 18, supposed to justify our steps. So what's the first thing we're going to do?
Subtract 3.
Subtract 3. What property is that?
Subtraction property of equality.
What's being left behind?
Negative 5z.
Equals
15.
15. Now, again, they might multiply everything times negative 1 right now to get rid of the negative in front of the 5z. So they might insert a multiplication property of negative 1 right now. I'm assuming you don't want to do that. You would rather do what?
Negative 5.
Divide by negative 5.
So if you're going to divide by negative 5, what property did you just do?
Division property of equality.
Division property of equality. Z is going to equal
Negative 3.
-3. Last one. Nope, we have 2 left, don't we? Okay, what are we going to do here?
Add 8.
I'm sorry?
Add 8.
So if we're adding 8, that is the
Division property of equality.
so what's left behind?
Negative m.
Equals -3 plus 8. How are we getting rid of that negative? Multiply times -1. So what property is that?
Multiplication property of negative
Multiplication property of -1. Our solution, n is going to equal -5. And last one. First thing you're gonna do,
Subtract 5.
what property is that? Nine minus 5 is
4.
now what? You could divide by -2/3, which actually, if you're dividing by 2/3, what's our rule? When you divide by a fraction, keep, change, flip, right? You do keep, change, flip. So we are going to do it this way. So if I find the reciprocal of a -2/3, that would be -3/2, correct? What property is this? What? You could multiply by 3 and do the multiplication property of 3, or do the multiplication property of equality. Then you could divide by a -2 and do the inverse, or do the multiplication property of, or division property of equality. You could do that, but there's another property right now that you've been avoiding. And I'm making you do it right now. Go back to that yellow foldable with all of your properties in it. Because right now, these diagonals are going to cancel. Say it louder. In this case, inverse property of multiplication. If I multiply a number by its reciprocal, it is the inverse property of multiplication. Multiply a number by its reciprocal, you get the number 1. 9/1 times 1/9 becomes 1. 3/2 multiplied by 2/3 is the reciprocal. You're going to get 1. Does it matter if I have 1x left behind? So you are going to have cases where you are going to be multiplying by a reciprocal, and you need to recognize that as the inverse property of multiplication. Now, how are we going to multiply 4 times a -3/2? Put it over 1. What is 4 times a -3? -12. What's 1 times 2? So x is going to equal -6. So now we have the subtraction property of equality and the inverse property of multiplication. What would this property be, or what was done right here? You could just say divide. When we changed from an improper fraction to an integer of -6, you just did division. So you do have some questions that show up like that coming up here in the future. Worksheet 2.2.